This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, this is Hannah from the Blue Hill Public Library, and I'm going to do a recording here of my digital decluttering presentation for anybody who hasn't been able to attend one of those workshops live. This is going to be a pretty wide-ranging presentation covering lots of different operating systems and types of devices that will hopefully teach you how to free up some space on your device, stay more organized, and find what you're looking for. So during this presentation, the main things that we're going to go over are these broad categories. We're going to talk a little bit about naming your files well and organizing them, how to search for files on your computer, simple ways that you can save some space. We're going to delve just a little bit into the cloud and then end by discussing some strategies around email. So under file naming and organization, we're going to discuss file names, how to view and sort files on your computer, and a little bit about using folders. So file naming, while it's a little bit of a dry subject, can be a really useful way to keep yourself organized and find what you're looking for. When you're thinking about what to call a file when you're saving it, these are some principles you should keep in mind. Unique, so no two files should have the same name. Descriptive, so it should tell you a little bit about what is in that file from the name. And consistent, so if you have a bunch of similar files, try to name them using a convention that's going to be consistent over time. Here's a screenshot of some file names that basically adhere to these principles. You can see they're all unique. None of them have the same name as another. They are descriptive, so you get a little bit of a sense of what is contained in that document from reading the name. And they're consistent. You can see a few of them are the same kind of file from 2 different years, and they've got the same name with just the year changed in the file name. Some more good naming principles. You should name your file something that's easy to read by you, an actual human being, as well as computer friendly. So there are certain characters and things that computers don't like in their file names. And you can use alphabetical names as an easy way to stay organized. So to talk about those first two, like I said, there are certain characters that computers don't really like to have in file names. A lot of those special characters, like maybe asterisks or slashes, because computers use those for other things. So most places won't even let you use those. Also, spaces are good to avoid in your file names. I think this used to be a bigger issue than it really is now. Most programs are okay with you using spaces in your file names if you want to. But to be sort of the most computer friendly and just cover all your bases, it's good to use something else instead. So this screenshot has some examples of different things you can use to make it still easy for you to read as a human and parse through the name, but without using spaces. So you could use underscores, which is that first example, those lines that go sort of underneath where the letters are. Hyphens, dashes in between the words, or something called camel case, which is just when you capitalize the first letter of each word in the name. And then thinking about alphabetical names, this screenshot on the right is an example of some file folders that we use at the library that are organized by date. So if you actually put the date in year, then month, then day, which is not exactly the way that most people normally think of writing the date, that will keep things when the files are sorted alphabetically in chronological order as well. So that's a good tip if you do have, things that are date specific, to use that format, even though it might be tempting to start with month and day. If you actually start with the year and you have multiple years worth of files, that'll help keep them organized. One thing that I think a lot of people either don't know a lot about or don't use to the fullest extent that they could is that there are different ways that you can view files on your computer. And this is true on both Windows and Mac. So the screenshot on the left there shows a Windows computer, and you can see these files are pictures. They don't necessarily have the most descriptive names. And rather than go through and rename all of them, in this case, the easiest way is just to show them as these extra large icons to browse through them. So you get that actual visual information in addition to the information from the file name, which in this case isn't very helpful. You can find these options. There's usually a little icon here underneath the search bar near the upper right of the screen. If you click on it, it'll give you all these options. So you can show an actual sort of preview of the file, in these case images, in these extra large or large sizes. And then you also have these other options like details, which is going to be more similar to the Mac example that we're showing on the right here, where you get a little bit more than just the file name. You don't see a preview of the image, but you would see, for example, maybe date modified or size or some other features. So you can toggle back and forth between some of these different views depending on what you're looking for. Like I said, if you're looking at images and trying to find that one picture you took that one day, it might be easiest to browse looking at the actual large icons. But if you're trying to find a file that you know you created or modified on a certain date, the details view might be more helpful. And on Mac, you get very similar options. They're over here near the upper left of the file browser window. They have these little sort of illustrations to show what types of browsing you're doing. So in this case, the lines are selected, which shows that detail view with a bunch of different metadata associated with each file. But you can also use icons like over here on the left, those little squares. There's like a pane view if you're digging into lots of different folders, that'll show you sort of a little preview of what's in each folder. And then there's also a little slideshow view, which is sort of a nice combination sometimes of seeing that preview, but also having some of that other information about a file. And you can also sort files based, if you have them in this detailed view, like in the example on the right, if you click on one of these headers, for example, if you click on name, it will organize the files alphabetically by name. If you then click on date modified, it would organize them chronologically by date. If you click on one of those headers a second time, it'll put it in reverse order, so reverse chronological or reverse alphabetical. And that's just the way that you're viewing the files. It's not making any permanent changes to your setup. It's just different ways that you can view and sort them. So again, you can toggle around between these different views and the way you've got things sorted, just based on what's going to be helpful for you to find what you're looking for in that moment. And then you can always change it back to another way later. You can also, when you're in that detail view, which I've now got pulled up in sort of both operating systems, you can add or remove different fields to that detail view. So a lot of times what is on there by default is this date modified field, which can be helpful if you want to know, the last time that you opened a document and made changes to it and then saved it. But sometimes what you're really looking for is actually date created, right? You might not remember when the last time you edited something is, but you know that you first made it in 2015 or whatever. And that might not be on that set of fields by default, but if you right click on these headers, for example, you could right click right next to where it says name, or on a Mac, you would use the control click option. That should have this menu pop up where you can then check or uncheck the different fields that you want to be able to see. So you could add, for example, date created if you think that would be a helpful field to use to sort. And you could take things away. If you don't care what kind of file it is or what type of file it is, if you're on Windows, you could uncheck that and just sort of get it out of your view so you could focus on what you're actually looking for. And just a brief word about folders. Folders can be another good way to really organize your files, especially if you haven't used good file naming conventions in the past. Like you can see in this example here, final paper is not really a good file name. It's okay in this context because I know it's inside a folder for a particular class I took, inside a particular semester, inside a year, inside my folder of all my college coursework. So having those folders adds some more context to what would otherwise be a pretty bad file name because it's not very descriptive. If I had all of my coursework together in one big folder, final paper, I would have no way of knowing which class that was for. So that's another way that you can organize things, especially if you don't want to go through the trouble of renaming a lot of files. You can use good file naming conventions going forward, and also use folders to help structure and add context to the files that you already have. So that was just a little crash course on sorting and viewing files on your computer. Next up, I'm going to talk about searching. So this is sort of part of the antidote for if your trouble with cluttered computers is that you just can't find that particular file that you're looking for at any given time. We're going to talk about where you can search your computer, some search tips, and then some ways that you can customize your sidebar to make it easier to search for things. So both Mac and PC operating systems have ways that you can search your entire computer for files. On Mac, which is this top screenshot here, there's a magnifying glass in the upper right corner of your screen. If you click on that, it will open this search bar right in the middle of your screen, and you can just type in some keywords. On Windows, it's going to be under the Start menu, which is usually down in the upper left corner. That'll open up the menu, the Start menu, and there's a search bar right at the very bottom. These might look slightly different depending on your device and your operating system, but those are basically where they are. And the nice thing about a computer-wide search like this is that for text documents, it'll search the full text of the entire document. So if you have a Word doc that you've created, or an Excel spreadsheet, anything where you've input text into it, you may not remember what you called it or where you saved it, but if you remember a key phrase, some unique set of words that are in it, you could search for that and it should pull it up in your results. You can also search within a particular folder. So if you know, I know I saved it in this folder, but there's a lot of stuff in here and I can't remember what it's called, you can limit your search to just in a particular folder. So you can navigate to that folder in your Finder or your file browser, and there's usually a search box in the upper right corner on both operating systems. On Mac, you're going to want to double check this bar that shows up near the top of the file browser window. It may be defaulting to search this Mac, which would search the entire computer, and you'd have to select you just want to keep it within a particular folder. On a Windows PC, it will just search within the folder by default if you've got a particular folder open. And this is that sort of slideshow view that I was talking about before as one way that you can view your files on a Mac. So you get a little preview of what the files look like, and you also get some of those nice details down below. And here's some just general tips about searching. This is true whether you're searching your computer for a file or Googling something online or searching the library's catalog. These are just general principles. The first is that searching is iterative, so don't give up if you don't find what you're looking for immediately. You're going to be searching, not finding it, revising your search, trying again, maybe getting a little closer, fine-tuning your search a little more, doing it again and again in multiple iterations. So a lot of people get discouraged when they don't immediately find what they're looking for, but just know that that happens to everybody, and you just need to kind of think of it as a process and go back and fine-tune your search a little bit more. In order to do that, a good thing to remember is that less specific searches will yield more results, whereas more specific searches will narrow your results down. So that can be a little bit of a counterintuitive thought for a lot of people. But basically, the more information you put in, the more limited your results are going to be, because it's going to be looking only for things that have all that information included. So if your problem is that you're putting stuff in and you're just getting too many results, there's no way for you to sort through them all to find what you're looking for, then you probably need to add a keyword, make your search more specific, just add a little bit more information into the search so it can narrow it down for you. If you're having the opposite problem where you're putting in a search and just nothing is coming up, then you maybe need to make your search less specific. Try thinking about if you're searching for a word that's plural, take off the S, and that will be a broader search. Maybe you saved it with only a singular name, things like that. So That's just a general principle. If your problem is that you can't find what you're looking for because nothing is showing up, make it broader. And if your problem is that there's still too many results, make it more specific. And one last little tip is that you can customize your sidebar. Again, this works on both operating systems. So usually you can do this just by clicking and dragging a folder over to that sidebar and letting it go, and then it'll appear there. And you can also remove things, generally by right-clicking, or if you're on a Mac, control-clicking on them and just deleting them from that favorites bar. And this is helpful if there is a folder on your computer that you often are searching for files in, and you just want to be able to get right there without having to dig in through a lot of subfolders. You can also take away things, if, for example, you never use the AirDrop folder, you could remove that from your favorites bar so that you're a little bit more focused only on looking through options that you really use frequently. It's not going to take it off your computer entirely or anything like that. It's just going to remove it from that favorites so that it's not presented right in front of you every time you go searching for something. Oh, I think I skipped ahead a little. We're going to talk about space savers next, if I can get my slide. Funny, it's not showing that. Anyway, we're going to talk about general ways that you can save space on your device. And now is when we're going to start to kind of bring in mobile devices in addition to computers. So the first thing you're going to want to do is probably figure out how much space you have on your device. There's usually an easy way to do this on any device. For example, on a PC, it's just going to be under My Computer, and you're going to look at that C disk drive. That's your hard drive. That'll tell you how much space you've used out of how much total you have. On a Mac, which is this bottom screenshot, similarly, if you go to the Apple icon in the very upper left menu bar on your computer, and you click on About This Mac, that will open this window, and then you can click on Storage as a little tab option here. And that will show you a nice breakdown, not only of how much space you've used versus how much you have, but also give you some broad categories of things that are taking up large chunks of space. And the iPhone will look really similar to that. It should be in your settings under General, under Storage. And that will also, again, show you how much total space you have, what you've used, and how that's broken out into some broad categories. One easy space saver that I always recommend to people first is to empty your downloads folder. So things that you download from the internet get automatically saved in your downloads folder, and that should be cleared out periodically. I tend to do it like once a month. I just delete what's in there. If you've never deleted your downloads before, it may be a lot to look at. I would say it's pretty safe to just delete whatever's in there. If you want to spend some time looking through and making sure that there's nothing that you've previously downloaded that you want to save somewhere else on your computer, you can definitely do that. But generally, what will be in there are things that you have downloaded from the internet, which usually means that they're still available somehow, either in the form of an email attachment that someone sent to you that you may still have that message, or they're still up on a website somewhere and you can download them again if you need to. Those things do change. Things on the internet don't necessarily stay where they are forever, but often what's in your downloads folder is just stuff that you needed to use for a second, you wanted to look at when it first got sent to you, for whatever reason you needed it momentarily, but it doesn't have to become a permanent part of your computer's collection. So if you just highlight everything in your downloads folder and either hit the delete key or drag it to the trash can icon, that will usually free up a lot of space if you don't do it very frequently. Depending on your computer settings, it may automatically empty itself after a certain time, or you may even have your downloads set to go somewhere else to some other folder. But most computers by default will be saving things to that downloads folder, and they'll just be sitting there until you deal with them. So that's a great way to save up some space pretty quickly and without a lot of consequences for the things that you're trying to use. Another thing that should be done regularly is emptying your trash, or it's called the recycle bin on a Windows computer. These are things that you have previously deleted. Maybe you just deleted your whole downloads folder. Now everything's in your trash. So you're not actually going to see that space saving benefit on your computer until you empty out the trash. And on a Mac, there's a little trash can icon on your dock you can click. That will open this up. And then there's an empty button near the upper right of the window. On a PC, the recycle bin is usually on your desktop as an icon. If you double click it, it'll open it up, and similarly, there should be an option to just say empty the recycle bin. If you want, if you're worried about accidentally deleting something that you might use, you could wait to empty your trash. You could certainly go through and do kind of a cleanup of your computer, your downloads, maybe some other files you think you want to get rid of, and then wait a week or two and see if you miss anything before you empty the trash, because you do still have one last chance to get it back before you empty the trash. But once you do that, it's gone for good. Another way to free up space, and the big thing on mobile devices, is to delete unused apps or software. So mobile devices we haven't talked too much about so far, just because they're not really designed to store lots of files in the same way that computers are. But they do primarily have apps, which are what take up most of the room on them. And I think in the beginning days of the mobile craze, a lot of people went kind of app crazy, and you can absolutely get an app for everything. And if you use those apps, then that's great. But if you don't use them, they may be taking up some valuable space on your device. So if you hold down on them, these X's should appear, and you should be able to delete anything that you're not using. And you can kind of rest assured that most companies and services now have mobile-friendly websites. So you'll still have your web browser on your device, and you should be able to use that to navigate to a website for a particular service. So if you're worried about like, oh, but I love, this service or this company, and I don't use it very often, but sometimes I do want to look at it on my phone, you could consider whether it'll work for you to just go to their website rather than having a separate app taking up space on the computer, on the phone. And you also don't have to worry about deleting anything that is vital to the operation of your device, because as you'll see, there are several apps on here, camera, clock, photos, etc., that don't have that X appearing. And that's because the operating system has, identified those as ones that are built in. So you really can't delete them, which is kind of nice because it means you know that you're not deleting anything that is required for your phone or tablet to run properly. You can also definitely think about deleting software you're not using from a computer. On Windows, you can see all of the software you've got installed just by opening that Start menu. Again, that's in the bottom left. And that should open up a list of all the programs you've got. You may have to scroll a bit to see everything. Usually there's an uninstall feature built into all of those programs if you decide that you, for example, aren't using Google Earth Pro very much anymore. Maybe you want to uninstall that. And on a Mac, you're going to open the Applications folder. And again, you can just sort of look through and see maybe you're not using Text Wrangler as much anymore because maybe you have a new word processing software that you use more often, or you're only using Google Docs now. You can think about deleting things that are maybe taking up space that you're not using very often. And I think for most people on your computers, the biggest thing is going to be to just delete files that you no longer need. And unfortunately, there's not a great, super time-saving trick to this. You really do have to kind of put in the time to look through your files and determine what you no longer need. One thing that can help is remember you can sort them. So if your primary concern is just freeing up space on your hard drive, because you're totally out of room, maybe you want to sort them by size. On a Mac, you can use this gear icon here in the file browser window. If you click on that, it'll give you this option to arrange by, and you can pick whichever field you want. I've chosen size, so you can see it's grouping my files by different sizes. Different types of files are bigger or smaller than others. So for example, movies, you can see a lot of these in the biggest category are these .mov files. They take up much more space than something like a Word document or a PDF. So if your primary concern is saving space, I would sort things by size and start with that really impactful file size. So movies, images, sound files, those things are going to take up more space, whereas, spreadsheets, Word documents, PDFs are likely going to take up less space unless they have lots of pictures embedded in them somehow. So yeah, I would go through those first if your primary concern is space saving, and you may be surprised how quickly you can free up room rather than spending hours and hours going through your Word documents, and then you only freed up a little bit of space after doing all of that. You can also sort by date. That's another nice way. It's sort of like going through your closet and thinking, okay, I haven't worn this in 5 years. Maybe it's time for me to get rid of it. If there are documents that you haven't either opened, you can use date last opened, or documents you last modified, made any changes to a long time ago. Those might also be a good first candidate to look at in terms of things you could easily get rid of. But ultimately, it's really up to you to look through and figure out what you can live without and what you still need. One other option in terms of saving space, if you've done all of that work and looked through and decided you really do need to keep everything, is that you can think about storing large files elsewhere. If you don't need to access them frequently, a good option could be to put them somewhere else other than your device's hard drive. So you could use an external hard drive, which is what's pictured here. This is basically a second computer hard drive. You can get them with lots and lots and lots of room. You can plug it into your computer in order to access them. And for example, like if you have a ton of old photos, but you don't need to see them very often, or old video clips, things like that, those might be good candidates to store on an external drive. You can also store things on a USB drive, or some people call it a flash drive or a thumb drive. Those, are smaller than an external hard drive, but they even make those with quite a lot of storage space, and they're pretty inexpensive. So if you don't want to go to the trouble and investment of getting a whole external hard drive with way more space than you might need, you could think about just getting a pretty robust USB drive. That's easy to store in a drawer somewhere, and you could offload some of your files there. The other option for storing large files elsewhere is cloud storage, and that's what we're going to talk about next in just a little bit of detail. You could definitely do a whole hour-long presentation about the cloud and more, but I'm going to just touch on some of the most basic services that you may be familiar with. Cloud is a concept and a term that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, I think, because they're not exactly sure what it is. But in a nutshell, it just means that it is stored somewhere else, not on your physical computer. It's stored on someone else's machine. It could be anywhere in the world, and you have access to it through the internet. So it's not taking up space on your computer. That's why it can be a good option if you're running out of space. But you do still have access to those things anytime you're connected to the internet. So as opposed to something like an external hard drive, which you'd have to dig out of its file cabinet and plug into your computer, it might be a little bit more accessible to store things on the cloud as long as you have reliable internet connection. Google Drive and Google Photos, all part of the Google family of products, are one place that you could store things. If you have a Gmail account, you already have access to this service. Gmail accounts are free, so you could always set one up if you want to try this. Google gives you 15 gigabytes of free storage with your account, which is a pretty good deal, especially compared to a lot of these other cloud services. And you can also purchase additional storage if you want more. And again, this would just be a way that you could upload certain documents from your computer. Instead of you storing them on your computer, you could have Google store them for you, and you would be able to access them as long as you were able to access the internet and log into your Google account. Dropbox is another service you might have heard of. It's definitely less free space compared to Google. Remember, Google was 15 gigabytes of storage. Dropbox gives you 2 gigabytes. But again, that might be a helpful amount if you just need to move a few things off your computer. And again, more is available with paid plans. And a lot of these services are not necessarily intended just for storage. Many of them are used primarily for file sharing. So with both Google Drive and Dropbox, a lot of people use them to be able to share files with each other, so more than one person can easily access them. And a lot of these cloud services are also used for backing up your files. So maybe you don't want to only have a copy on the cloud, you want to have your copy on your computer and back it up on the cloud. So that's a little bit different from the idea of just storing it on the cloud. iCloud is a service that's built into all Apple devices. It gives you 15 gigabytes of free storage, and again, they're happy to sell you more storage with a paid plan. iCloud is a little bit trickier, I think, than some of the other cloud options in terms of using it as a storage solution. It's much more intended to be syncing your information across your different Apple devices. I've had a lot of people with questions about iCloud just because it will tend to fill up fast and then give you all kinds of threatening messages about how you need to buy more space. And a lot of that can be solved by going into your settings and telling it more specifically what you want it to sync and back up. But that is another cloud option, especially if you have an Apple device. And then finally, Microsoft OneDrive is sort of Microsoft's answer to all these other cloud services. It comes with a Microsoft account. So if you have an Outlook or a Hotmail email address, you will have access to this. It gives you 5 gigabytes of free storage and again, more available for purchase. And it's pretty similar to the other options. It's cloud storage associated with this Microsoft account. Okay, for some reason, there we go. There's my title slide. So the last section I'm going to go through for this presentation is just a little bit about email. This is another place in which a lot of people feel like they're just overwhelmed with clutter. We're going to talk about some ways that you can reduce the amount of email you're getting, including unsubscribing from newsletters and reporting spam. And then a few ways that you can try to organize your inbox, such as archiving and filing messages and setting up filters. Okay, come on, there we go. So unsubscribing is a great way to reduce the volume of email that you're getting, especially if most of your emails are sort of newsletters and automated emails coming from different companies or services that you've used in the past. Unsubscribing is something that you should do for emails that you're getting, again, like newsletters, from reputable sources that you know who they are and you may know why you're on their mailing list, but you just don't want to get their emails anymore. It's easy to do. There is usually a link at the bottom, at the very bottom of a newsletter or email. In all of this other sort of impossible to read tiny jargon, there should be a link to unsubscribe somewhere down there. And this is you talking directly to the company that's sending you the email saying, take me off your list. I don't want to get your emails anymore. So again, you should really only do this if you are reasonably confident that the email you're getting is from some kind of reputable source and you know who they are. This is not something I would recommend doing on anything that looks like junk mail, any kind of scam, any kind of solicitation. Anything that doesn't look totally above board, I would not click on any links in that email. But, for example, this is a newsletter from Adobe Acrobat. You may know why you're on their list. Oh yeah, I registered for an Adobe product. They must have added me to their mailing list when I gave them my email address for that. If it's clear that it's coming from a reliable source and you just don't want to get that email anymore, clicking unsubscribe will take you to a page. Sometimes it'll just say you've been unsubscribed. Sometimes it'll ask you for a little bit of feedback in terms of your preferences. And once you've done that, you'll no longer be receiving emails from that company. So that's kind of a way to turn it off at the source. Another option to stop receiving email from certain sources is to report it as spam. This is a screenshot from Gmail just as an example, but any email service is going to have this feature. If you select a message, it's usually a little exclamation point icon. It may be text that says mark as spam or report spam, mark as junk, any kind of terminology like that. And this is a little bit different from unsubscribing. This is a conversation between you and your email service. So you're not talking directly to the person who sent you the message because maybe it's something that looks really sketchy. You don't want to interact with them at all. You don't want to even let them know that their email got to a human being because then they might send you more of it. So instead, you tell your email service, hey, this kind of message is not good. You shouldn't let it get through to me anymore. And you're not only going to be, deleting that message for yourself, but you're going to be helping to teach your email service's algorithms what kinds of messages it should and should not be letting through to everyone who uses that service. So in a way, it's kind of a public service. If you report things as spam, that helps you and it helps everyone else. And that should ensure that no more email from that sender is coming through to your inbox anymore. And I'm going to talk a little bit about ways that you can organize some of your emails. So there's a sort of internet trend called inbox zero, where many people prefer to have no messages in their inbox. Something I aspire to but have not quite achieved yet. But what I do try to do is move messages out of my inbox once I've either responded to them or read them and I don't need to do anything more with them. If they're messages that I don't necessarily want to delete because I might want to refer back to them at some point, but I don't need them to have my attention anymore, I will file them in a folder. So again, this is Gmail as an example, but pretty much any email service you use is going to have some of these options in terms of creating folders and sorting your emails into different places other than your inbox. On Gmail, it's this little folder with an arrow icon, which will both add a label to this email, and you can create as many different categories as you want. So you might have work and personal and vacation and recipes. However many categories make sense to you, you can create a label for that. And then using this button will also move the message into a folder with that label. So that way, later on, if you want to look at all of the messages that you have put in your recipes folder, it's easy to pull those all up at once, but they're not in your inbox. They're not going to be like that first thing that you see when you log into your email. Similarly, Gmail has this archive feature. Again, there's a similar feature on a lot of email services. This you could use, it would not add a label necessarily to your message, but it would just move it out of your inbox. So if you're not quite as obsessive as I am and you don't want to label every email that you get, you can just archive the ones that you don't need to see anymore. Again, this doesn't delete them from your email. You can still search for them. You can still find them if you look at all your mail, but it's not in the inbox. So the idea is to start treating the inbox as sort of a to-do list or a clearinghouse for just the stuff that you really need to be paying attention to at the time. And that helps email feel a little bit less overwhelming and a little bit more focused. And again, this is Gmail as an example, but this kind of thing is available through most email services. But you can create filters. So if you don't want to wait for something to show up in your inbox in order to put a label on it, archive it, anything like that, you can create a filter that will automatically move messages with certain criteria into certain places. So, maybe there's a newsletter that you don't want to unsubscribe to, but you don't want it to show up in your inbox. You want to just put it in a special folder so that you can review all those newsletters when you feel like it, when you have a chance. You don't feel like you're being bombarded with them every week. You have them as sort of an archive you can look through. You could create a filter. Again, in Gmail, this is in your settings under filters and blocked email addresses. You could either say anything from this email, do this with it. You could say anything with this subject line, anything with these words in the message somewhere. There's lots of different criteria you can use to set up a filter. And then once you put it in and say create filter, it'll give you a second set of options to figure out what you want it to do with messages that meet that criteria. So, archive it immediately, mark it as unread, put this label on it. You can do all kinds of things to stay organized that way without even having to necessarily have those messages ever hit your inbox if you don't want them to. So that's the very quick rundown on digital decluttering. I hope some of that was helpful to you. I am available for any Blue Hill Library patrons who have questions or want to meet one-on-one, have an appointment, go over some more specific steps of how to put some of these ideas into practice. You can contact me at the library. All that information is on our website at bhpl.net. Thanks so much, guys. Hope you're hanging in there.